Hey, fellas, I'm Penelope Hayes, 52 years old, and I've got a story that'll make your blood boil. Or maybe make you cheer for me. I spent 20 years at a consulting firm, giving my all, only to have my boss call me a worthless dumbass at the company party, laughing about firing me like it was a big joke. But I didn't just take it. I made him regret every word. Stick around to hear how I turned his arrogance into his downfall. Hit that like button if you've ever been disrespected by someone who thought they'd get away with it. And let's get into this fight. For 2 decades, I poured my heart into Reynolds and Carter Consulting. I started as a junior analyst in 2005, fresh out of college, and worked my way up to senior consultant by sheer grit. Long nights, missed family events, weekends spent fixing reports. I did it all to keep the company running smoothly. My boss, Michael Reynolds, was the CEO and one of the founders. He was a big talker, always in a sharp suit, with a baritone voice that commanded attention. But behind the scenes, he was a mess, fumbling presentations, botching numbers, forgetting key details. I covered for him every time. I'd rewrite his reports, charm clients he'd offended, even smooth over his drunken rants at conferences. I made him look like a genius, and he took all the credit. I didn't mind. I thought loyalty would pay off. I was wrong. It was late March 2025 when my world turned upside down. I was sitting on my old leather couch, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the fridge, when my phone pinged. It was a text from Ethan, a 24-year-old junior analyst I'd mentored for 3 years. "I thought you should see this before Monday," he wrote, with a video attached. My fingers felt cold as I pressed play. The screen lit up, and there was Michael, at the company's annual staff party, a whiskey glass in his hand, his gray suit rumpled. He was in the middle of the crowd, co-workers I'd shared coffee runs and late nights with, and his voice cut through the chatter like a knife. "Penelope's such a worthless dumbass," he said, a grin splitting his face. "Next month, we're getting rid of her. She won't even see it coming." The crowd reacted. A few chuckled nervously. Others looked away, but no one said a word in my defense. I replayed the video, the 30-second clip looping as my chest tightened. 20 years flashed before my eyes. Every late night, every missed birthday with my sister's kids, every time I'd defended Michael when whispers of his incompetence grew too loud. I'd saved his ass more times than I could count, and this was my reward. A punchline delivered to a room full of laughter. My hands shook, not with fear, but with rage. Humiliation burned in my throat, but beneath it, something else sparked. Cold, clear determination. Michael thought I was a loyal dog, too naive to bite back. He was dead wrong. By the third loop of the video, I wasn't just watching my betrayal, I was planning his ruin. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, the ceiling stretching above me like a blank slate for my racing thoughts. Michael's voice echoed in my head. "Worthless dumbass. She won't even see it coming." Each word was a splinter under my skin. I thought of every report I'd rewritten for him, every client I'd charmed while he fumbled, every time he'd taken credit for my work. He wasn't the mastermind he pretended to be. I was, and he'd just handed me the match to burn his house down. By the time the first gray light slipped through the blinds, I'd made up my mind. If Michael thought I'd go quietly, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I didn't need sleep. I needed a plan. Monday morning, I walked into Reynolds and Carter at 7:55. May. Same as always. The office buzzed with its usual hum. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the faint smell of burnt coffee in the air. My heartbeat was steady, my face a mask of calm I'd perfected over years of dealing with Michael's nonsense. I'd dressed sharp, black blazer, crisp white blouse, because today wasn't just another day. It was the start of the game. Michael's office door was wide open, and he was leaning back in his chair, laughing with James, the 50-year-old CFO who was always eager to kiss the ring. I paused in the doorway, letting my shadow fall across the carpet. "Morning, Michael," I said, my voice polite, a smile curling just enough to look routine. His eyes flicked to me, and for a split second, I saw it. Smugness, thick as the whiskey he'd held Saturday night. "Good weekend?" he asked, his tone light, like he hadn't mocked me to a crowd 48 hours ago. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "Great weekend. Feeling refreshed for another productive month." His smirk widened, a predator sure of his prey. "That's what I like to hear," he said, leaning forward slightly, as if daring me to flinch. I didn't. I turned, walked to my desk, and sat down, the weight of his ignorance settling over me like a cloak. He thought he had me cornered, a lamb waiting for the slaughter. He had no idea I'd already sharpened the knife. The office pulsed around me, interns shuffling papers, the copier wheezing in the corner, but my mind was elsewhere. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keys, and let the facade lock into place. For now, I'd play the part. Loyal Penelope, clueless and compliant. But beneath the surface, I was already moving pieces he couldn't see. I glanced at his office again, his laughter drifting out like a taunt. Enjoy it, Michael. I thought, it's the last time you'll laugh on my dime. The game had begun, and I was 3 steps ahead before he'd even rolled the dice. The next 4 weeks were a performance, every move rehearsed to perfection. I walked into the office each morning with the same composed smile, my heels clicking against the tile like a metronome counting down Michael's days. I nodded in meetings, offered solutions with just the right amount of enthusiasm, and took on extra work without a flicker of complaint. Late nights became my sanctuary. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I stayed past the others, fingers flying over my keyboard. But I wasn't polishing reports for Michael anymore. I was collecting evidence. Emails piled up in a hidden folder, every careless directive he'd sent, every backhanded compliment buried in a thread. I gathered contracts I'd drafted or salvaged, each a testament to the work he'd claimed as his own, and financial reports with sloppy numbers James had signed off on, gaps I'd quietly filled for years. Most wouldn't think twice about these scraps, but I did. I was building a net to drag Michael down, thread by thread. I reached out to old clients, the ones who'd stayed loyal to me, not him. Casual calls, a subtle hint, I'm considering new opportunities. Their responses were immediate, eager. Penelope, we'd follow you anywhere, one said. I smiled into the receiver, filing their trust away for later. Then I met with an attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, mid-30s, over coffee downtown. I laid out the groundwork. Severance clauses, non-competes, the legal edges I could dance along. You've got options, she said, her pen tapping her notepad. Play this right, and he'll feel it where it hurts. I left with her card and a plan taking shape. The final piece clicked when I dialed Pearson Associates, a competitor that had been eyeing Reynolds and Carter for months. Their VP, Laura, didn't hesitate. We've heard about you. Penelope, let's talk. I hung up, staring at the city lights beyond my window, Michael's whiskey-soaked laugh looping in my mind, fueling every step. I wasn't just leaving. I was taking everything he took for granted with me. Clients, credibility, control. Now, fellas, if you've ever been disrespected by someone who thought you'd just take it, drop a comment below. Just say I've been there. I'll read every one and reply. Keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how I made Michael pay for every word he said. 4 weeks of smiling through the lie, and I was ready to pull the first string. The morning of my final day broke gray and heavy, the air thick with a tension only I could feel. I arrived at Reynolds and Carter early, before the sun had fully risen, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder like a weapon. The office was quiet, just the hum of the HVAC and the faint drip of the coffee machine. I settled at my desk, watching the minutes tick toward the endgame. Across the floor, Michael's office glowed. He was in there, laughing with James again, their voices carrying like they owned the world. I let my gaze linger, a polite smile fixed on my face, masking the storm brewing beneath. The day crawled forward, normal on the surface, but I could feel the shift coming. I answered emails, nodded at coworkers, kept my posture relaxed even as my pulse thrummed at 300 beats a minute. At 3:30 p.m. my phone lit up with the summons I'd anticipated for weeks. Michael Reynolds, please come to my office. I exhaled slowly, smoothing my blouse with steady hands. This wasn't a surprise, it was a stage, and I'd memorized my lines. I crossed the floor, heels clicking, and knocked on Michael's door. I stepped inside with the same polite smile I'd worn all month. The office smelled of leather and stale ambition. Rachel from HR was seated across from him, a company-issued folder in front of her. Standard protocol. Michael put on his best fake sympathy, leaning back in his chair like a king granting an audience. Penelope, please have a seat, he said, his voice measured, scripted. I sat, folding my hands in my lap, meeting his gaze without a flicker. We appreciate your dedication to the company over the last 20 years, he began, the words hollow as they rolled off his tongue. But as you know, the industry is evolving, and we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding staffing. Rachel stayed silent, her eyes on the folder. We've decided to restructure your role, he continued, and unfortunately, your position is being phased out. She slid the folder across the table, a severance package wrapped in corporate courtesy. I didn't touch it. We want to ensure a smooth transition, he added, watching me. He expected tears, anger, confusion, something to feed his ego. Instead, I smiled, soft and steady. I understand, I said. He blinked, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. Too easy. Too clean. He cleared his throat. We'll need your company laptop and access badge before the end of the day. And of course, a non-disclosure agreement regarding operations. I nodded, still calm. They wanted me quiet. a ghost fading without a whisper. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping into false warmth. I know this must be difficult, but you're talented. Penelope, I'm sure you'll land on your feet. I tilted my head just enough to unsettle him. Oh, I know I will, I said, my tone smooth as glass. His relief flashed, brief and misplaced, before I stood, picking up the folder with that same smile. I walked out, the weight of 20 years lifting off my shoulders. Not his victory, but mine. I was free to burn it all down. Back at my desk, the clock ticked toward 5:00 p.m. My final hours as an employee slipping away. I moved with purpose, archiving every email, project file, and client contract I could touch. All perfectly legal while I still had access. The office buzzed with its usual end-of-day chatter, co-workers oblivious to the fuse I was lighting. I opened a new email, addressed it to Thomas Bennett, our biggest client, who made up 40% of our revenue for a decade. Hi, Thomas. I typed, I wanted to thank you for your partnership over the years. Given my upcoming departure from Reynolds & Carter, I'll be available for consulting in the near future. Would love to discuss how I can continue assisting your company. Let me know if you'd like to set up a call. I hit send, packed my things, pens, a photo of my niece, the laptop I'd surrender, and smiled at coworkers with polite goodbyes. At 5:00 sharp, I walked out, the glass doors hissing shut behind me. I didn't look back. Michael had no idea what I'd just unleashed. The morning after my departure, I woke to my phone buzzing against the nightstand. 3 missed calls from Reynolds & Carter, all unknown extensions, but I knew who they traced back to. I leaned back against my pillows, a slow smile forming as I let the 4th call ring out. By noon, a text from Ethan buzzed through. Penelope, whatever you did. The office is in full meltdown mode. Thomas pulled out of his contract. Michael's losing it. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the bare walls. Thomas had seen the writing on the wall. No Penelope, no stability, no reason to stay. At 2:30 p.m. My phone lit up again. Michael Reynolds. I answered, keeping my tone calm, almost bored. Hello. A sharp exhale crackled through the line. Then his voice, tight and controlled. Penelope, I just heard about Thomas. He mentioned you reached out. I let the silence stretch, savoring his unease. I did, I said simply, a beat of quiet. Then he forced a chuckle, the sound brittle. Listen, I think there's been some miscommunication. This was just office banter. You know that. I cut in, my voice dangerously light. I don't hold grudges. Michael, I just make smart decisions. His breathing tightened, a faint hitch I could almost feel through the phone. Are you working for someone else? He pressed, desperation creeping in. I smiled, twirling a pen between my fingers. I don't see how that's relevant to you. He cursed under his breath, and I hung up, the click of punctuation mark on his dawning panic. That afternoon, I stepped into Pearson Associates' downtown office, the sleek glass walls a stark contrast to the dated clutter of Reynolds & Carter. David Pierce, the 52-year-old CEO, greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Penelope, he said, leading me to a conference room. The moment I heard you were leaving, I had my team watching. Michael's ship is sinking. I gave him a knowing smile, settling into a leather chair. And you want to take advantage of that? He smirked. I want us both to win. I pulled a file from my bag. Projections I'd built from memory, client renewals I'd tracked, weaknesses in Michael's contracts I'd exploited for years to keep them afloat. I slid it across the table. If you want to take them down, start here. David flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with satisfaction as he scanned the numbers, the names, the leverage I'd handed him. This is gold, he muttered, then looked up. I assume you're not giving this away for free. I smiled, leaning back. No, I'm not. His grin widened, a predator recognizing another. Let's talk terms. By the time I left, the deal was sealed. I wasn't just joining Pierce, I was bringing Michael's clients with me. A migration he'd feel like a gut punch. Monday morning, I sat in my new office at Pierce, a corner space with a view of the skyline, when Ethan's next text buzzed through at 8:15. Holy hell. Penelope. Michael just stormed into the main office. He looks like he hasn't slept. I swear he's about to combust. I smirked, picturing him unraveling, tie askew, voice cracking as he barked at underlings. The first wave had hit. 3 major clients I'd nursed through a decade of Michael's fumbles had sent termination notices before the doors even opened. Pierce had moved fast, faster than Michael could have anticipated, and I was the architect of it all. By 9:00, the cracks were fractures. James had locked himself in his office, crunching numbers to tally the damage, while legal scrambled for loopholes to trap the fleeing clients. Michael was on the phones, begging executives to stay, his pleas falling on ears already tuned to my quiet promises. At noon, he called me again, his tone strained, on edge. Penelope, he snapped. I don't know what you've been telling people, but we have a serious problem. I arched an eyebrow, though he couldn't see it. Oh, what kind of problem? He exhaled sharply. You know damn well what kind. Thomas is gone, and now 3 other accounts have pulled out. Millions in revenue overnight. Did you... He stopped, unwilling to say it. I let the silence drag, then spoke, calm and careful. I don't work for Reynolds and Carter anymore. Michael, what happens to your company isn't my concern. A beat of silence. Then his voice turned sharp. You're working for Pierce, aren't you? I smiled. I don't see how that's relevant to you. He cursed, louder this time, and I could almost see him gripping his desk, power slipping through his fingers. This industry is small. Penelope, you don't want to burn bridges. I let out a small laugh, cold and deliberate. You burned that bridge the moment you called me a worthless dumbass in front of the entire company. He went quiet, and I hung up, the fear in his silence sweeter than any apology. By 3:00 p.m. Ethan texted again. Emergency board meeting just called. Investors are freaking out. Talk of replacing Michael. I leaned back, satisfaction rolling through me. He'd hidden behind my work for years, but now the ugly truth was bare, and it was killing him faster than he could scream. Tuesday morning, I walked into Reynolds and Carter, not as an employee, but as a warning. The office was a graveyard of tension, the usual chatter replaced by whispers behind screens, quick glances darting my way. I crossed the floor, heels echoing, until I reached Michael's office. I knocked, and his gruff "come in" rasped through the door. I stepped inside, closing it behind me. He sat at his desk, tie loosened, dark circles bruising his eyes, his arrogance stripped bare. I took a seat across from him, mirroring our firing scene a week ago, and tilted my head. How's it going, Michael? I asked, my voice light, his jaw clenched, a muscle twitching. Cut the crap. Penelope, what do you want? I smiled, letting the question hang. Me. I just wanted to see how you were doing. He let out a bitter laugh, the sound scraping the air. Oh, you know how I'm doing. He took a deep breath, leaning forward. Look, if there's a way to fix this, to make it right, what would it take? The desperation in his voice was thick, a surrender I'd waited for. I leaned in, my voice soft but firm. There's no fixing this. Michael. His expression hardened, but his eyes flickered with defeat. I stood, smoothing my blazer. Enjoy unemployment, I said, turning to leave. Before I walked out, I glanced back, delivering the final cut he'd never expected. You should have known better than to underestimate me. Then I was gone, leaving him in the ruins he'd built. By Friday, the headlines hit like a thunderclap. Major client exodus at Reynolds and Carter. CEO under fire. Another read. Pierce & Associates acquires key clients in strategic move. I sat in my new office at Pierce, sipping coffee. The bitter brew a perfect match for the satisfaction curling through me. Michael's empire was crumbling into dust, and the world was watching. At 10:00 p.m. Ethan texted. Emergency investor meeting. Rumor is they're forcing Michael out. I smiled to myself, right on schedule. At 3:00 p.m. The internal email from Reynolds and Carter confirmed it. Effective immediately. Michael Reynolds has stepped down as CEO. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. Fired. Publicly humiliated. Gone. At 5:30, my inbox pinged. Subject, let's talk. From Michael himself. His desperation spilled out. Penelope, things have gotten out of control. I know you're behind this. Let's meet. Put this behind us. Predictable. Pathetic. I typed back, my fingers steady. Michael, there's nothing to discuss. This isn't fixable. Enjoy your weekend. I hit send, closing the last chapter of his career with a click. Monday morning, I stepped into Pierce & Associates headquarters as their newest senior partner, a title earned not by groveling, but by proving I was the best. David greeted me in the executive lounge, his handshake firm. Welcome aboard. Penelope, he said. From what I hear, you've already made quite an impact. I smiled, feeling the weight of possibility settle over me. That afternoon, Michael showed up at my office, a shadow of the man he'd been. No suit, no smirk, just tired eyes and a drawn face. You really did it. Huh, he muttered, his voice hollow. I tilted my head. You destroyed yourself. Michael, he exhaled sharply. I need a job. I stood, meeting his gaze with a cold smile. You don't need a job. You need a lesson. I turned back to my desk, dismissing him without another word. That night, I sat by the window, wine in hand, the city's skyline glittering below. I win, I whispered, the words a quiet toast to the future I'd claimed. I'm sharing this story because I know someone out there needs to hear it. If you've been disrespected, if someone's tried to tear you down, don't let them win. Fight smarter, not harder. Drop your story in the comments. I want to know how you've handled being underestimated. I'll pick one to share next week, so make it real. Hit that subscribe button, and check out the video next to this one. There's more true stories waiting. Share this with your buddies too. We all need to know how to stand up and take back what's ours.